Good evening, everyone. Today, I will be presenting my experiment on the effect of different categories of music on the development of lima bean plants. I would like to begin my presentation by introducing myself. My name is McMann. I'm currently a senior at Lima High School, and I will be attending Virginia Tech in the fall in order to pursue a degree in the biological sciences. Importantly, a couple reasons why I chose this project are throughout the entirety of my life, my family has grown much of their own food, and because of this, they have an extensive amount of knowledge and know the best ways to produce adequate plants. Because of their experience and knowledge, I was able to go to them and ask them for help if I needed it with growing my lima bean plants. Surprisingly, this topic can have a significant impact in the world we live in today, specifically to the lima bean agricultural business. If this study proves to be a success, it could actually help this business grow their economic status and ultimately produce more money. To begin, lima beans, also known as Bacillus lunatus, are diverse in shapes, sizes, and color. They can either grow on vines or bushes, and they develop in flat-shaped pods of varying lengths. This plant also has trifoliate leaves, meaning that 3 leaves develop from every branch. Also, beans grow inside the pods, varying in size based on harvest time. Lima beans thrive in specific climates, such as tropical climates with warm, humid conditions, typically between 65 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit with 20 to 24 inches of rain. In addition, lima beans have distinguishable growth stages which include sprouting, upward growth, large leaves, flowering, pod formation, and maturation. Music is a powerful medium, influencing various aspects of plant growth. Different types of music can lead to positive or negative growth rates in plants. Harsh sounding music is typically negative to plant growth, while positive sounding music can actually promote plant growth. Music affects the plants by influencing the guard cells that surround the stomata of each plant. The stomata are also known as the pores on the leaves. And depending on the genre of music, these guard cells can actually cause the stomata to either open more or close more. If the stomata are open more, this allows for more moisture and nutrients to go inside the plant, thus producing healthier plants and better growth rates. But if the stomata are closed more, this could actually starve the plants of the vital nutrients and moisture that it needs for growth. There are a few aspects of music that affects the development of plants. One of these aspects that affects plant growth are the sound waves generated by the music. Sound waves can affect plant growth, influencing height, root growth, and crop yield. Interestingly, a study discovered if the wavelength of the sound wave matches the length of the leaf, then optimum growth will occur. Another aspect of music that affects plant growth is volume. It was discovered through multiple research studies that medium volume is best for plant growth. In addition, different genres of music can affect the growth rate of plants. Different music categories such as classical or jazz music promote the growth of plants, while rock music or heavy metal music can actually be detrimental to plant growth. Lastly, music can have either positive or negative growth characteristics on plants. Studies have found that positive growth effects include longer roots, bigger leaves, more crops, and longer stems. On the other hand, past research has shown that negative growth characteristics include decreased root growth, shorter plants, larger leaves, and less crop production. Overall, there is a lack of research in the scientific field of how music affects the development of plants. Not many researchers find the need to study the effect of music on plant growth, but this study can help improve a few things within the world we live in today, such as improving plant growth or improving the lima bean agricultural business. With this study, I intend to broaden the knowledge of this field by experimenting with different genres of music and lima bean plant growth, which have never been tested together before. After conducting all the necessary background research, I was able to formulate my research question, which is what are the effects of different categories of music on the physical development of lima bean plants? The null hypothesis that I formulated for this study is if the lima bean plants listen to classical music and heavy metal music while they are growing, then there will be no difference in the growth of plants. On the other hand, the research hypothesis that I developed for this study is if the lima bean plants listen to classical music and heavy metal music while they're growing, then there will be a difference in the growth of the plants. I was able to formulate these hypotheses by researching multiple studies and discovering that different genres of music have different growth, that different genres of music influence plant development at varying levels. Moving forward, the variables I identified are as follows. The independent variable is the categories of music I tested, which was classical music and heavy metal music. The dependent variables were the height of the lima bean plants and the number of bean pods produced by lima bean plants. The control group was the group that was exposed to no music. And lastly, the constants of my experiment included the soil I used, the water the plants received, the pots the plants were placed in, the amount of sunlight they took in, the location they grew in, and the brand of seeds I used. To begin the methodology of my study, I first gathered all the necessary materials needed to conduct my study. The materials I gathered were Miracle-Gro potting soil, planting pots, Barrymore lima bean seeds, a watering pail, a watering hose, a tape measure, a Bluetooth speaker, and the Apple Music app. I then set all those materials up in the greenhouse that I used. After the materials were set up, I then began my randomization method. I then began to pour the soil in the pots. After the soil was poured in the pots, I then began my randomization method. The randomization method that I used for my study is that I chose lima bean seeds out of the packet in a random order, and I planted them in the pots with soil. After the seeds were planted, I used a random number generator to decide which pots go into which music group. After the seeds were planted, I then separated those pots into 3 groups, which included a control group, a classical music group, and a heavy metal music group. I then numbered each pot. Pots 1 through 10 were the control group, pots 11 through 20 were the classical music group, and pots 21 through 30 were the heavy metal music group. After the plant pots were separated into 3 groups, they were then exposed to their specific category of music for 1 hour per day. Because I only had 1 greenhouse, I was forced to move the plants that were not listening to music out of the greenhouse in order to prevent those groups from being subjected to the group in the greenhouse, from being subjected to the music that the group in the greenhouse was listening to. The plants were then watered as needed. The lima bean plants were then harvested on day 82, and the soil and dirt was washed off them. The soil and dirt was washed off the plants in order to measure the plants from the lowest root to the very top of the plant. The lima bean pods were then picked and counted from each plant. After all the data was collected in my notebook, I then transferred that data into a Google spreadsheet, which was then exported to Data Classroom where statistical analysis could be conducted. After collecting all my data, I then created 2 graphs in order to visualize the data. This graph represents the effect of different genres of music on the height of the lima bean plants. The first group is the control group of the experiment. These dots are primarily clustered together and have relatively lower heights than the classical music group. This means that these plants were in similar conditions and grew like a normal lima bean plant would. The second group is the group that listens to classical music. These values are generally higher than the heights of the control group and the heavy metal music group, which means that classical music influenced these plants to have better growth rates. The third group is the group that listens to heavy metal music. These values are very similar to each other, with data values being lower than the classical music group, but being similar to the control group, which is unusual because this group should have produced the lowest heights in the experiment. This group should be the lowest because past research has shown that detrimental music, such as heavy metal music, can actually decrease the growth rate of plants. Lastly, these data points in the heavy metal music group are very spread apart from the cluster, indicating that there are outliers within my data. On the other hand, this graph represents the effect of different genres of music on the number of bean pods produced by lima bean plants. Excuse me. The control group had a relatively low amount of bean pods produced, although the two topmost data points had an unusually high amount of bean pods, indicating that they are outliers. This group shows that bean pods developed in a random order and were not influenced by any category of music. The classical music group had relatively higher amounts of bean pods compared to the control group and the heavy metal music group. This means that the classical music caused the lima bean plants to develop more bean pods. Lastly, the heavy metal music group produced relatively lower amounts of bean pods compared to the other two groups, with the lowest amount of bean pods produced being in this group, which means that these plants experienced decreased growth rates due to the heavy metal music. The statistical test that aligned the most with my study was a one-way ANOVA test. This test was appropriate to use because with this test, it determines if there is a significant difference between the mean values of multiple groups being tested, which aligns with my experimental design. At the significance level of 0.05, I failed to reject the null hypothesis with a p-value of 0.07. A p-value of 0.07 indicates that there is some confidence that the groups are different, but not enough to reject the null hypothesis. After conducting the necessary hypothesis testing, I concluded that there is not sufficient enough evidence at the 0.05 significance level to conclude that different categories of music affect the height or number of bean pods produced by lima bean plants. Previous studies have performed experiments that produced data that supported the theory of music affecting the development of plants. Various studies supported this idea, but my experiment did not yield similar results. Different categories of music are supposed to positively or negatively affect the growth of plants, but my experiment did not fully support this. I tested classical music and heavy metal music to see if these genres of music affect the height of lima bean plants, but the statistical analysis indicated that the music had some effect on the height, but not enough for it to be significant. I also tested to see if these genres of music affect the production of bean pods of lima bean plants, and like the height, the music did not have enough of a significant effect. In conclusion, I found that different categories of music do not significantly affect the development of lima bean plants, but further research is needed to confirm this. There were a few significant limitations that appeared in my experiment. The biggest limitation that I encountered was the lack of a controlled environment. The greenhouse I used was extremely dilapidated, and there were many holes that other organisms could use to get inside the greenhouse. I also wasn't able to leave the door to the greenhouse closed, due to the fact that if I did, the temperature in the greenhouse would reach over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, thus killing my plants. I also could not keep the greenhouse at a constant temperature. Another limitation that was prevalent was the lack of better equipment. For example, the speaker I used was very cheap and not that impressive, and this could have affected the data of my experiment. Previous studies were able to acquire expensive and efficient speakers which allowed for better quality sound, thus producing better results in their data. The last prevalent limitation was the lack of time. If I had more time to conduct this experiment, or had more time to conduct more trials, I could have produced better results. After completing my experiment, I deduced that there is a significant call for research. There were many limitations within my experiment that could have affected the results. This experiment needs to be done again in order to address and prevent all those limitations. Also, more categories of music need to be tested to see if other categories of music influence lima bean plant growth more. Lastly, variables such as sugar concentration and chlorophyll production need to be tested to see if different genres of music affect lima bean plant growth, even at the chemical level. While taking research through Piedmont Government School, I learned many new things about research and, most importantly, about myself. Through taking this class, I learned about the research process and how to find areas of study that need further research. I also learned that procrastinating is not healthy for my mental state. This class taught me that I need to work ahead on assignments in order to get them done adequately and efficiently. Waiting to the last minute on my assignments only stressed me out and not produced the best work that I can. The last thing I learned from this class is that I actually like researching studies and conducting experiments that have never been done before. To conclude my presentation, I would like to give a special thank you to Ms. Long and Mrs. Fain for helping and guiding me through this long and challenging process. I would also like to thank my mom and my uncle for helping me grow my lima bean plants. At this time, I would like to answer any questions that you all may have. Yes?
So you stated one of your constants was water?
Yes.
And in your methodology, it said water plants as needed?
Yes.
That sounds a bit subjective. How do you determine, I guess, the plant needing to be watered?
So, Mr. Talarico is asking how I decided when to water the plants. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, the greenhouse that I used, the temperature in the greenhouse would get extremely hot. So on days during the summer where it would be very sunny and bright, or just even slightly cloudy, I would water the plants on those days. But some days during the summer, it would be extremely rainy and the sun wouldn't be out at all. So on those days, I didn't feel the need to water the plants because when I went to go check in on them, the soil was still wet from the previous day. So I didn't want to oversaturate the plants.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Ms. Walls.
I didn't see it here in your presentation, but did you use any other form of fertilizer, any other kind of soil supplements at all for this? Or was it just soil and the plant and the water?
Ms. Walls is asking me if I only use soil, water, and the planting plots in my experiment. Yes, I only use the soil and the water for my experiment. Yes, Ms. Craig.
When you watered the plants, did all the plants get the same amount of water?
So Mrs. Craig is asking me if all the plants got the same amount of water. When I was watering the plants, I made sure to water all the plants so that the water completely covered the soil. So there wasn't a specific measurement of water. I basically kind of just made sure all the water covered all the soil.
And then, I have one more question.
Yes,
When you
ma'am.
brought the plants back in, did they go in the same place in the greenhouse? Like, I know you had them numbered, you said 1 through 10 and then 11 through 20. Did 1 through 10 always go on the left-hand side in a certain area, and then the other in the middle, and then the other on the other side?
Ms. Craig is asking me where the plants were placed in the greenhouse. So I put the plants in rows of 10. There was a first row, a middle row, and a last row. The first row was the control group, the middle row was the classical music group, and the last row was the heavy metal music group. I should have specified in my study. Yes, Mr. Hare.
I know you mentioned towards the end of your slides that you used a speaker to project the music. When you projected the music, was each type of music projected at the same tone, or did you adjust the volume to whatever you thought?
Mr. Hare is asking me if I used the same volume throughout the entire experiment. Yes, I used the same volume throughout the entire experiment. I put the volume on maximum volume each time.